Hi, class. In this recording, we're going to focus on more details of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system, and we'll also spend some time focusing on another division known as the enteric nervous system. Now, as we look at the sympathetic division, it's worth emphasizing that there's very short, relatively short, preganglionic neurons or axons, and the postganglionic axons are relatively long relative to, and here's a frame of reference, relative to the parasympathetic division. These preganglionic neurosoma are going to be within the lateral horns of the gray matter and the spinal cord, and they're also going to be have nearby regions of spinal cord gray matter located throughout that serves as a point of origin. The axons of these preganglionic neurosomas, or these fibers, exit the spinal cord typically through spinal nerves that are located through T1 through L2. So we're going to have from the first thoracic vertebrae all the way to the second lumbar vertebrae having branches of the sympathetic division leaving the central nervous system. These are all going to lead to sympathetic chain ganglia, or chain of ganglia, sometimes referred to as the paravertebral ganglia. And I love this name, paravertebral ganglia. It's next to the vertebra. It's para, so it's to the left and to the right, and they're ganglia, clusters of neurosoma outside of the central nervous system. So as we're looking at that, you can see the sympathetic chain right here within this cadaver that's been pre-dissected for us. And as we're looking at the ganglia are the wide portions. So we have ganglia there. Let me clear our screen so we can see there's a ganglia right there, pretty clear. There's a very clear ganglia right there, and I'll shift to red. And then we have the sympathetic chain heading up throughout with the green ganglia that I circled. And I didn't circle every ganglia which are present. Now, as we're looking at these ganglia, they're longitudinal, which means they go superior, inferior. They go the length of the vertebral column, and they're adjacent to the vertebral column on the left, right, or both sides. And they typically are going to start at the cervical level and go all the way down to the coccygeal level. And as we're looking at the sympathetic nerve fibers, or the axons of these neurons, they're then going to be distributed to every level of the body. So from the sympathetic chain ganglia that I had outlined in green and red, we're going to have nerve fibers traveling to every other major part of the body. Now, as we're looking at the sympathetic division, we have some communicating rami, and these communicating rami are going to allow for paravertebral ganglion to be connected to spinal nerves. And as we're looking at these ganglia, we can have the preganglionic fibers, which are small myelinated fibers that go from the spinal nerve to the ganglion. So let me check that here. We have our preganglionic fibers making it to the ganglion right there, step number 1. And then we have our postganglionic fibers. Those postganglionic fibers are going to leave the ganglion and do that through the communicating ramus. These postganglionic fibers are unmyelinated, so they have slower transmission speeds. They have continuous transmission, whereas these myelinated preganglionic fibers have faster saltatory conduction. And as we're looking at these postganglionic fibers, some of these postganglionic fibers will form a bridge that goes back to the spinal nerve. So as we're looking at the postganglionic fibers, I'm going to clear the screen here, and we'll go with blue for postganglionic fibers. Some of the postganglionic fibers are going to form a bridge right there. As we look at these postganglionic fibers, some of them are going to also extend the rest of the way to the target organ directly. So we can have our postganglionic fibers synapse with a organ directly, or they can go back to the spinal nerve. The postganglionic fibers are going to have multiple branches associated with them. Now, as we look at the sympathetic chain, The postganglionic fibers can go on one of three courses. They can end in a ganglia. Let's go with red for that one. Let's go to green for our next one. Some can travel up or down the chain and synapse in other ganglia at other levels. Oh, I meant to go green here. So we'll say green here for number 2. And let's go with blue for number 3. And then some can pass through the chain without synapsing and continue all the way as splenic nerves. So let me back up a slide here. For number 1 in red, we have end in a ganglion, which they enter and synapse immediately with a postganglionic neuron. So as we're looking at that, let's back up a slide here, assuming I can. I'm very bad at backing up on slides here as I'm working with this program. So we'll go to previous. And then we can have in red the ganglion that goes directly to the target organ. And then let's go forward a slide here. The ones that go up or down, we'll use blue for that. Previous. Let's go to blue. Some of those fibers can travel up or down, so we can see our 2s here. So the preganglionic fiber goes up or down a synapse, or give me a ganglion, and then we'll send off its fibers. Or our third option that we had was some of the fibers can go through the chain without synapsing and continue directly as splenic nerves. And we'll go for green with that one. So for those fibers, they can, let me shift to here. They can continue directly as the splenic nerve. So hopefully this helps to clear it up for you. As you can imagine, this presentation I'm not terribly thrilled with. There are a lot of pieces to the puzzle that I'm not talking about right now, just for the sake of time. In terms of the amount of material that's in this chapter, we are covering about 20% of the chapter. So if you look at your lecture textbook, there's about 80% more material in your lecture textbook that we're not getting to, primarily because I'm really focused on the time constraints that we have to work with. As we look at the adrenal glands, shift gears, our adrenal glands are sometimes referred to as suprarenal because they are above, superior the kidneys or renal glands. They are going to be effectively 2 glands in one. We have the adrenal cortex around the outside and the adrenal medulla on the inside. Our cortex is going to be made of multiple layers and will secrete steroid-based hormones primarily. And then when we look at the medulla, that medulla is one big layer, and it's essentially a giant sympathetic ganglion. And it has some modified postganglionic neurons that do not have any fibers. And what does it do? Well, it secretes a cocktail, a mixture of hormones that go into the bloodstream. Particularly, they are the catecholamines. And of those catecholamines, 85% is adrenaline, the namesake of the adrenal glands, sometimes referred to as epinephrine, and about 15% is going to be noradrenaline or norepinephrine. As we're looking at the adrenal glands, I'll shift to blue here. We have a preganglionic fiber traveling to the adrenal medulla, and then at the adrenal medulla, the postganglionic neurons don't have those really long axons. Instead, they're going to focus on secreting those catecholamines, the adrenaline and noradrenaline. Now, as we look at our parasympathetic division in more detail, something we really need to emphasize is that the preganglionic neurons are very long preganglionic neurons. These preganglionic neurons will originate within the brainstem or very low down in the spinal cord. As we work with those preganglionic fibers, they have a habit, or they have a tendency of terminating very, very near, in or near our target organ. That very long preganglion fiber will carry the signal almost directly to the organ. It'll synapse, and then after the synapse, we have a very short postganglion fiber that will carry the signal to the effector tissue directly. So wow, this does a lot of stuff here as we look at our parasympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system is very selective in terms of the target organ that's going to be stimulated. So there's very little neural divergence. And when we say divergence, we mean that the signal doesn't become very diffuse. When we want to send a specific signal to a specific organ, we are able to do that with a lot more effectiveness with our parasympathetic nervous system relative to our sympathetic nervous system. And of all the nerves, all the cranial nerves associated with the parasympathetic division, our vagus nerve needs to get special recognition, cranial nerve number 10, because it covers viscera far all the way down to the proximal half of the colon. So as we look at this vagus nerve, and I'm going to circle it in blue here, our vagus nerve affects the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the intestines, the widest variety of organs in our body. So when in doubt, say vagus nerve, because it wanders around the body and goes to a bunch of different organs. As we look at the oculomotor nerve, I'll circle this one in yellow. Our oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve number 3, is going to focus on eye movement. As we look at that eye, in particular, we're going to have the pupil being narrowed by the oculomotor nerve, and it's also going to allow for the lens to be focused. As we look at our facial nerve, and I'll go with green for, actually, let's go with red for the facial nerve. As we look at our facial nerve, cranial nerve number 7, our facial nerve is going to focus on secretions, facial nerve number, or cranial nerve number 7. So as we're looking at that nerve, it's going to send signal to the submandibular salivary gland. It's also going to send signals to the eye to control the production of tears. And then finally, let's go with black for the glossopharyngeal. As we look at that glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve number 9, it's going to send a signal to the parotid salivary glands, which is the largest salivary gland in our bodies. Let's dive in and talk about the enteric nervous system. Our enteric nervous system is, well, kind of controversial depending on the textbook you look at. Sometimes it's a separate branch of the nervous system. Other times it's going to be considered just a subdivision of the parasympathetic nervous system. As we look at the enteric nervous system, it's worth emphasizing it does not arise from either the brainstem or spinal cord. It has no CNS components at all. And it's going to focus on the smooth muscle and glands of the intestines. There are many neurons, over 100 plus million neurons found within the digestive tract, and this enteric nervous system is going to be self-regulated by these neurons. Our enteric nervous system has its own reflexes. Some of the reflexes include motility, so the movement of materials through the digestive tract, and the secretion of digestive enzymes. Now, as we look at our digestive system in the enteric nervous system, we need to focus on this root word, enter. This is a root word referring to the intestinal tract or digestive system. So if you think of enterobacteria or enterobacter, that's a generic term that refers to bacteria of the digestive tract. The enteric nervous system is going to be a division of the nervous system focused on the digestive tract. And our enteric nervous system is going to require both sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation as well for normal digestive functioning. That's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.